In today's lecture, we will discuss the yolk sac and Allen twice. So sometime you get a full question on write a short note on yolk sac. So you should know what are the different types of yolk sacs are there, or what are the different stages of the yolk sac. Now it is an endodermal sac lying ventral to the embryonic disc. Yolk sac develops from the cavity of blastocyst. You can see in this diagram, this is amniotic cavity, this is the yolk sac. So this is ectoderm, this is endoderm, or epiblast or hypoblast. So this is the trophoblast layer. Now in this case you can see, so when it is lined by the uh, basically the cells which are derived from the trophoblast. So the cavity of the blastocyst is now called as the primary yolk sac because it is lined by the Husser's membrane. This Husser's membrane is basically made up of cells derived from the trophoblast. Now coming next to it, primary yolk sac is bounded above by the cubical endoderm and elsewhere lined by the flattened cells. You can see in this diagram. Then is with the formation of extraembryonic mesoderm, later on the extraembryonic coelom, the yolk sac becomes much smaller and lining epithelium it becomes the cubicle. Now it is called as secondary yolk sac. What happened next to it? That is progressive increase in the size of the embryonic disc. It happens. Head and tail end, however, remain close to each other. Increase in length causes the bulging upward into the amniotic cavity. You can see in this diagram. So these diagrams are taken from your standard textbook. Now coming next to it, with further enlargement, the embryonic disc becomes folded on itself at the head and tail end and called as head and tail folds. Similar folds formed on each side called as lateral folds, which results with that the embryo is enclosed all around by ectoderm except in the region through which the vitellointestinal duct it passes. So this is the different processes which are happening. Now next to it, with the formation of head and tail and parts, the yolk sac becomes enclosed within the embryo. You can see with this folding, the part of the yolk sac it is enclosed within the embryo. So this is primitive gut from which most of the GIT is derived, or gastrointestinal tract is derived. At first it is wide communication with the yolk sac. You can see here. So later on it becomes narrow and now it is called as vitellointestinal duct. Now the cranial to this communication, the part of the primitive gut is going to form the foregut, or we call it as foregut. The caudal to this communication is the hindgut. You can see here. Then is intervening part is called as midgut. So the different structures they are derived from these three primitive guts, that is foregut, midgut and hindgut. Yolk sac becomes small and inconspicuous and is now termed as the definitive yolk sac. Now narrow channel connecting it to the gut is called vitellointestinal duct. Fate of the yolk sac is the yolk sac lies ventral to the germ disc and is lined by cells of hypoblast. As the folding of the embryo happens during 4th month of the communication between the yolk sac and midgut narrows. The narrow part becomes the vitelline duct. In the later part of the pregnancy, the yolk sac completely degenerates, but sometimes vitelline duct or vitellointestinal duct persists as Meckel's diverticulum. So this is the fate of the yolk sac. What are the functions of the yolk sac? First is a hemopoiesis. It produces blood for the embryo until the liver is formed during 6th week. Formation of the primitive gut by its dorsal portion, we have discussed that. Then the formation of the primordial germ cells. The primordial germ cells are formed from the walls of the yolk sac and migrate to the developing gonad during the 4th week, where they form the primitive germ cells, that is spermatogonia and oogonia. Then formation of the allantois, a small diverticulum arises from the caudal portion of the yolk sac. Now coming to this allantois or allantoenteric diverticulum, this is a small diverticulum arising from the caudal wall of the yolk sac and extends into the connecting stalk. You can see here. After the folding of the embryo, the allantois is connected with the dilated terminal part of the hindgut called as cloaca. Now, what are the functions of allantois? It is vascularized by allantoic vessels that later becomes fetal umbilical arteries and veins. In adult, it is represented by the median umbilical ligament. It also contributes to the formation of the urinary bladder. Now, this is the urachal cyst or sinus of the fistula. Extraembryonic portion of the allantois degenerates. The intraembryonic portion gets incorporated into the apex of the urinary bladder, and remaining portion involutes to form the thick urinary tube called as urachus. So, after birth, urachus becomes fibrous cord called as median umbilical ligament, extending from apex of the urinary bladder to umbilicus. The failure of urachus to obliterate leads to the formation of urachal cyst, sinus, or fistula. So this is all about the yolk sac and allantois. Sometime you get a small note on these two structures. Thank you very much.